I was bullied.
Now I was a bully. Bryan's stutter was one of the many things that I bullied him over.
I always believed that I didn't have anyone to talk to or share what I was going through.
It's amazing how a sincere, simple apology can change everything. Hi, welcome to Bully Dialogues. This episode, we're going to talk about bullying in professional sports, which is not a new topic for us. We've been dealing with this quite a lot, even before we started this podcast. But it's a pretty pervasive thing. And people are reluctant to talk about it. Professional sports teams are often reluctant to talk about it because it's one of those things where by talking about it, it's almost admitting that there's a problem and having to figure out then how to deal with that from a branding perspective rather than what the impact of the bullying is. And, you know, I think one of the prime examples we've used, and I'll say it again, David Beckham. And we saw in his documentary on Netflix how at the height of his fame could do no wrong until he made one mistake. And he got red carded in the playoffs against Argentina in the World Cup 1998 and was berated by England en masse because they lost and because he got sent off. And that level of vitriol would destroy most people, and it certainly had an impact on David Beckham. But he put his head down, he didn't react, he didn't retaliate. He was upset by it, we learned later, but he put his head down and did what he does best, which is to dazzle on the soccer field. And that kind of single-minded determination and that talent silenced the bullies, and he's become an internationally recognized brand that we all know. You know, but that was a long time ago. Owen Farrell. You know, so when we're talking about bullying in professional sports, before I talk about Owen Farrell, who resigned from English rugby because he was captain of English rugby, of England's rugby team, resigned because he was being so abused, booed every time he came onto the field, cyber abuse, and directed not only at him but at his family. And so there's this propensity of fans to bully players, professional athletes. And then it's multifaceted because there's coaches, there's bullying that's within the team itself. So this is a big deal issue. Bryan?
Yeah, I mean, there was even the story not so long ago of Marcus Rashford, you know, who said, I can handle being criticised in the media. I can handle being criticised in social media. He said, I can handle being criticised as a player. He said, but leave my family. I'm out of it. And his words were, where is the line? Where is the humanity? Were his words. And it's almost as if, because everybody has a social media platform of one or another, that people think a social media platform is a bully platform, and that's not just in sports; it's kind of everywhere. You know, it's a bully platform to be heard because you don't approve of something. But he's right. You know, at what point did we lose faith in players in sport and go after their families because we didn't like a move they made, or we didn't like a call which was made by them, or a goal, or a non-goal, or a try, or a non-try, whatever? When did that happen, and why?
I mean, look, there's always been a little bit of if you think about hooliganism in English soccer, that's been around a long time, since we were kids, and obviously before then. But if you're a avid fan, let's just say Manchester United, because I am, disappointing as they've been at the moment, terribly as we're playing at the moment, inconsistent and all of that. I won't get into that. But as a fan, you do have, you put your heart and soul into supporting it and supporting a team. And so if a player is being lazy or having a shit game or whatever, there's a certain amount that you feel ownership of the team.
Agreed, and that's the whole thing of team support.
Yeah, and so it comes.
But where is the line?
The line is taking it further than just criticizing a play.
Correct.
If it becomes a personal thing,
I agree that like a celebrity of any kind, whether it's sport or entertainment or politics or any field in which somebody puts themselves into an arena of being in a public persona, they always seem to complain at the same time, and fairly so, that there is a line in which they are entitled to a private life. And and I agree with that. Just because you put yourself into a public arena doesn't mean you don't have a private life or aren't allowed a private life. And a private life means your family, your children, your parents. What right does a fan who may be an avid supporter like you are, what right would you have to encroach on that person's privacy by going after their family because you didn't like something that they did or disapproved of their professional situation? That would be like somebody who you were working with in an office, and you decided that because you didn't approve of what they were doing in the office and they didn't close the deal, well, instead of dealing with them and working it out with them, you're going to go after their family because they didn't close the deal. So the point is that coming back to sport, which is a public arena, professional sportsmen are still entitled to a private life.
But so here's an example. Marcus Rashford being a perfect example when he was still playing for Manchester United.
Yeah.
And highly paid, very, very skilled, but there were a couple of incidents where he was partying and photographed partying, like I can't remember where it was, like in Dublin or something when he was meant to be in Manchester. And so missed a practice or whatever. And so you had this very, because he's a celebrity and because he's public, where you are seeing photographs, paparazzi photographs of him partying it up in a club at 3 a.m, and then it corresponded with him not playing well. So,
okay,
there was legitimate criticism, which again, you can go there, you can make that leap and say, listen, you're missing practice, you're not taking this seriously, you're being paid shitloads of money, we have higher expectations of what you do professionally, etc. But that doesn't, in any way, shape, or form, then mean that you can attack his family or even attack him personally.
There are two aspects there. One, I think in any profession, whether it's sport or anything else. I mean, I'm in the field of entertainment, and I know what it's like. If I know I have a show, or I've got a commitment, or I've got an event, or I've got a production, I can't show up being like trashed and fucked up from a party weekend, because it's not professional. So I wouldn't choose to do that while I'm working. So there is the aspect of you have a responsibility to your very highly paid job, but that is irrespective of whether you're being photographed or filmed being reckless or not. You have a responsibility, and that there is no question, and that needs to be first and foremost. A private life, in any profession, does require you to still have a sense of personal responsibility towards what your job is. However, I think what happens is, in any celebrity form, whether it's sport, I mean, my favorite sports icon in the world, and I'm not a swimmer, but I worship Michael Phelps. I
didn't know that.
Yeah, I was actually in Beijing in 2018, pre-COVID, and I went to the Olympic Stadium and to the ice cube, which is where the pool was, and I actually stood at the pool where he won his record number of gold medals. But I've always adored Michael Phelps. I've watched how he trains. I've watched his whole focus. He is the greatest Olympian in the world, in history. And he's certainly the most decorated. But he has admittedly, and he's been in interviews about when he was caught in a DUI, or he was seen smoking weed. So fuck what? Instead of people going, yes, but look at what he's achieving, and look at what he represents, they tore him down for a certain period because he was seen smoking weed. That's his private life. These kind of people are allowed to have that, but what happens is, whether it's sport or any other public arena, we as the public lift these people up, we put them onto pedestals, and we think they're not human, and we don't want to believe they are human.
But here's the thing, that's a sort of interesting segue with Michael Phelps.
Yeah.
So I'm going to compare...
Something about me you didn't know, love it.
Sure, there's that. But so Michael Phelps, he's been covered in terms of an athlete being covered, media coverage I'm talking about, probably as much as any professional athlete ever has been. Analyzed, dissected, his training, what he eats, when he shits, like everything. But one of the things is he has abnormally large feet. They're almost like flippers, his feet. And it's just how his body is. It's what makes him...
He's got length. He's got very long fingers. And his race, he won by like an nth of a fingernail.
Yeah. And, I mean, some have compared his feet literally to being like having flippers. But because it's natural and everything, it's fine. It's like admired and discussed and what gives him an edge, etc. And then you compare it to the response to equally natural Caster Semenya. And the response to her prowess as a runner, she's got too much testosterone. She's, just the racial undertones, whether it's homophobic or misogynistic, there are all these different undertones to her treatment and the bullying that she's received, not only from the public, but from international organizations and Olympic committees and people wanting to literally inject her with estrogen to make her less competitive. You don't see people saying, should we shave off some skin off Michael Phelps's toes? It's the same thing.
Yeah, I suppose it is. Yeah.
So there's, all these other issues come up, which underlie the bullying, whether it's the racism or misogyny or intersex phobia, whatever it is, But I think it's a very interesting thing.
You spoke earlier on about, in your first monologue, you spoke about sport and branding and brand awareness. One of the stories, this is another segue we encountered, about the brand awareness of sports teams and bullying was a story a couple of years ago with the Boston Bruins hockey team, where they discovered that one of its professional players, who was now in his early 20s.
I forget his name. It was like Mark Myers or some funny.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, double-barreled.
But it had been found out that when he was a teenager, he had bullied a disabled kid of color, and when it came out, he made what we call the conditional non-apology, which is the if I did something to you, I'm sorry, which is a non-apology. Because the moment you put an if in front of an apology, it's conditional.
Yeah, and that's damage control,
right.
Not even
but
apology.
Even with that, even with him publicly going, if I the brand of the Bruins looked at him and went, they don't want to associate with somebody who has that history. So they let him go. And so that's another aspect of sport, is that while we are proponents of behaviors can change, and bullying should not be framed or viewed as a label or an identity. When there are millions on the line, a company is going to look at your history and go, is this person an asset or is this person a liability? I think it would be interesting to know, and we'll never find out, but if the apology had been real and not conditional, if it had been holding his hand up and going, I did this, I did that, that's not who I am anymore, and I look back and I regret what I did, blah, blah, blah. That's a very different approach. So we're looking here at two aspects of bullying in sport, and one is the role of the spectator. One is looking at the history of a player and what value that they have in a team, and are they worth having in a team? And then a third aspect which we can get to is the treatment of players by coaches, because you know there is the old school approach, and I think we even saw it, Clint, in Beckham's documentary with his father. You know, who was the old school kind of coach. And I think we have started to see that, whether it's in business, whether it's in all kinds of leadership, that leadership with compassion and leadership with empathy and understanding get better results. I mean, you had a comment about, and you mentioned to me before we started recording, about a guy whose father had trained him and he didn't know how.
Oh yeah, there was that bodybuilder.
Yeah.
So there's this notion that when we speak of old school, there's this notion that tough love is what you give to an athlete, and it's the tough love that enables them to thrive, which is now being challenged as a methodology for coaching, based on some of those studies we've seen, like in the US military, where, you know, kindness and empathy are likely to generate more positive responses, both in terms of productivity, in terms of commitment, in terms of leadership, all those qualities, when empathy and kindness is brought into the equation. So you can, you know, where does tough love, and in some instance tough love does work, but when it crosses into abusiveness and into bullying, it's a fine line. The kid you're talking about, he was homeschooled, so he became a bodybuilder at a very, very young age. And because he was homeschooled, he didn't realize and didn't know until much later on in his life, when he was no longer under his father's iron fist, that he didn't know it wasn't normal to have to squat 150,000 times a day and to not eat, and to you know, have every waking hour be training. And you know, that kind of abuse, he didn't know what he didn't know. Because he was homeschooled, he didn't see, well, how come I'm the only one who has to do this? He thought that's
how it is. And it's, you, as you said that, you raised something that is another whole topic, but I'm going to just touch on it tangentially, which is the cycle of abuse at home. Is like, you know, people who are abused at home in whatever way it is, whether it's psychologically, whether it's in sport training, whether it's emotionally, sexually. That's what they know, and because he didn't have any exposure to anything else, that's all he knew. So he grew up with what he knew, and you often find that those kinds of people. You often ask why do people in their older life who were abused attract abusive people? And I think it's psychologically understood in psychological studies, and if there are any therapists out there who want to highlight this or want to challenge this, it's my understanding that people who have been abused and who don't know any different, that's what they know is love. So that's why they seek out abusive people. And you know, when we were in COVID, I went to a brilliant cognitive behavioral therapist for a short period. And one of the things he had said to me, he said, take a woman who was abused in her childhood. He said, put her in a room of 100 men, 99 of whom are kind and compassionate and empathetic, and one who is a mean, abusive bastard. She will automatically gravitate towards that one person out of 100, and not any of the other 99, because that's what she knows as love. So this guy who was told he had to do 150,000 squats a day has probably got the most delicious legs, but a totally fucked up mind.
So, yeah. So now the thing is, so then, one of the things we've discussed in our keynote, and that is relevant here also, is especially when it comes to like boarding schools and those kinds of institutions where bullying is downplayed as being like just an initiation ritual or a rite of passage or that kind of thing. That's very prevalent as well in sports. So sports teams, when a new athlete joins or whatever, and whether it's school or college or even in professional sports, there's this sort of just unspoken rule that it doesn't matter that you can force rookies to do things that extend beyond just like a friendly initiation process and actually absolutely become bullying behavior. And there's this definite disproportionate abuse of power.
And you know what? That abuse of power it can also extend to, I say this because, or what I'm about to say, is not condoning, as we don't do, but we also sometimes have to look at the reasons why people are bullied. Is it a meanness? Is it a conscious abuse of power, or is it because they are in a situation themselves that you may not know about? I mean, I had an experience last year where I was, at my age, I was preparing for my very first competition in bodybuilding. And there was a lot of things I didn't know, and I realized since that there are a lot of things I didn't know, and that I'm still learning. And I have grown to love the world of bodybuilding and the sport of it. But I was about 5 weeks out, and I was asking a lot of questions, and I was challenging my coach because I didn't know certain things, and I needed to feel reassured. And instead of the reassurance, I got quite an abusive response. It was, "You will listen to me, and you have to trust me, and you must do this, and you won't." And I'm thinking, I'm an adult, but I'm thinking of a youngster and a kid who's never gone through a process and is needing a nurturing and a kinder approach because it's new. And my whole point here is that I later discovered that he was going through a whole lot of emotional stuff of his own. And he wasn't trying to be mean. He wasn't trying to be unkind. He wasn't trying to be abusive of his power. He was going through a personal crisis, and I happened to be in the firing line.
But so here's the thing, because we've spoken about this certainly with teachers, but the same thing exists with coaches, obviously. So in a coach-athlete relationship, there's a power imbalance to a certain degree. because the coach's job is to tell you what to do, and yours is to listen. However, so if a coach is telling you what to do and pushing you hard, even sometimes in a tough love situation, all of that is understandable. And if the motivation behind that is to get the best out of the player or out of the athlete, is different from a coach who is being an asshole because they had a shit day and their wife's, I don't know, or husband or whoever was rude to them at the dinner table, and they're coming and taking it out on the athlete. That's different from wanting to get the best out of an athlete and maybe crossing a line even, which happens because your motivation is pure about wanting the best for the athlete. So I think that's a different thing. Going back to the...
But it's still in that moment, the person who's on the receiving end receives it as being bullied.
Yeah.
Receives it as being abused.
Yeah.
And I certainly, in that moment, I mean, I was absolutely shattered because I was like, I need to be guided, not broken down. And I felt broken down.
But, you know, and you're like mature enough to have recognized that and to have been able to, you know, step out of it or to, you know, do whatever you had to do to get yourself out of that situation. But you look at, I mean, there's an example, another hockey league example, like in 2021, it was the Chicago Blackhawks, where a guy accused, a former player accused one of the coaches of sexual abuse. And there was all this major fallout. And what the report, an independent report, revealed is that there was this much broader culture of bullying that was covered up and that people were silent about and people didn't want to talk about. And you look at Simone Biles, you know, one of the most decorated, finest Olympian gymnasts that ever was, ever has been, still is. She's spoken about being bullied by coaches and being abused, and not to mention the all of those gymnasts. I forget Reese, what's her name? I should know this, but it was that like gold medal winning dream team.
Yeah.
You know, whether it and all of them, they were being sexually abused. And the gymnastic organization that oversees all of gymnastics, the American Gymnastic Association, whatever it's called, I'm probably getting it wrong, they knew. And they covered it up. Now, you know, I mean, there is a distinction between bullying and sexual harassment. And never mind just sexual harassment, sexual assault, you know, rape in that case.
There is a distinction, but there is one thing that is absolutely, incontrovertibly in common, is that sexual assault and bullying are both about abuses of power.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, rape may be an act of sex, but rape is an abuse of power. It's disempowering the person who's on the receiving end, which is bullying.
So I think that there's definitely been I think with some of these people speaking out, you know, and we're going to cover this topic much more. We're going to speak to sports psychologists and to coaches and to really dig into this and to uncover a lot more of the stuff. This is sort of just scraping the surface. But I think that when you've started to see, you know, whether it's Simone Biles, whether it's Naomi Osaka, who was abused because she needed to just take a little bit of personal time and and was feeling too pressurized by the fans and the need to go out and speak to the press and all of the pressures that come with being a champion tennis player. You know, some of the accusations leveled at Serena Williams with all the racial undertones because she's the best, you know, the best that there is when it comes to tennis. Tiger Woods, the racism he had to endure, where, like, you know, all right, I suppose we'll let you play on the Georgia golf course. You know, you don't have the right skin tone, but you're good, so you can. Like that, like literally having to deal with that kind of, you know, racism. And so you're seeing a lot more, you know, Lewis Hamilton, Owen Farrell. You're just seeing a lot more people speaking about it. And I think that's what's shifting the understanding around it. And so it's not being dismissed as easily. It's not being, you're overreacting as easily. I think there's more of an appreciation of the extent to which this can really be damaging, no matter how brilliant an athlete you are.
You know, I can speak about this in a parallel universe, because in my main profession, which has been music in the last 40 years, where I've been a vocal coach and a music coach and worked with singers and musicians. It's very much a parallel approach, because, you know, I've had people who I work with, especially singers. I love working with singers and getting the most out of them. And the one thing it's one thing knowing how to guide somebody as to the mechanics of what to do. So whether it's teaching them how to sing, whether it's a coach who's teaching an athlete how to play a certain sport. The one thing which you can't teach and which has to be a human instinct is when you use the iron hand and when you use a velvet glove. Some people need one, some people need the other, and some people need both. And your instinct is knowing when to be iron hand and to push that that somebody feels like coach, whichever the coach is, coach has my back, or that he wants more out of me than I can give him. That instinct comes with experience. And what I say is you can't teach the instinct of knowing how far to push somebody at any given point. But I will say, there is nothing like the experience of seeing the light bulb in somebody's eyes when you've pushed them in a way that is so encouraging, and they go there. It's like they've been on the cliff's edge, and you've just gone, I'm going to push you and you will fly. And they fly.
Absolutely. But
and you see the joy in their face. That for me is real coaching.
Sure. But now, when you talk about using the iron fist, there's a way to use the iron fist and a way not to.
Yeah.
So, like saying, okay, no, you need to do one more version of that because I know you can do it better.
Right.
Is different than humiliating the person in front of everyone.
Correct.
Saying that was a shit rendition, like, you know what I mean? So it's also how you applying the iron fist.
Oh, listen, I saw it a few years ago. I was rehearsing a production of Priscilla, Queen of the Desert, and we were it was an all South African cast, which had been auditioned and booked and cast by a team who came out um, from Australia. And this lot were the biggest bunch of see you next Tuesdays.
Yeah.
The biggest bunch. There was amongst them a choreographer who had demeaned the one boy day after day after day after day in front of the whole company. That after that show ended, the boy left the industry because he was so destroyed and so disillusioned. What the fuck is that?
Well, listen, I think...
Whereas I've worked with the choreographers who've done the opposite, who've gone, I cast you because I saw something in you. Therefore, I'm going to do what I need to do to get you to where I need you to get.
Yeah, exactly. A different ball game.
Yeah.
But I think that it might be, I think it would be an interesting podcast. I think some of your fans and some of your, people who've followed your career I think it would be an interesting conversation to talk about bullying when it comes to auditions and bullying when it comes to performance. And,
Definitely.
And all of that kind. I think that's an episode unto itself.
Sure. But I'm just saying the whole parallel of coaching, whether it's in performance or whether it's in sport,
Yeah.
there are parallels to the how you get the best out of somebody without breaking them down.
And so, I think that one of the things that just sort of, in even wrapping this up, because I think we're near there, one of the, as much as there's been this shift and kind of a sea change shift in terms of, the athletes that are coming out and speaking out and what have you. And I think that, yeah, sure, that's making a difference, but there's still shame. There's shame around being bullied, and there's shame around speaking out because it's the same old, whether, especially in male sports, where complain about being bullied is something that potentially, makes your manhood be brought into question, because real men don't complain about being bullied. There's still that. And so that continued with just the same normalization of it because it's just a rite of passage and boys will be boys. And the same thing happens with girls. I'm not saying that it's that different. I think there's, the same shame and the same humiliation and same not wanting to be the one to say how this is impacting you because the whole team accepts it.
Yeah.
And that's part of the locker room culture. And it just is the way it is. And so people don't want to rock the boat that way because then it potentially threatens their career. It threatens their prospects. And certainly if it's the coach that's doing the bullying, even harder than if it's just among players or teammates. And part of the problem is there's a lack of conversations like this one.
Yeah.
And so hopefully we're doing our part to bring attention to this because it really is pervasive. And because it's sport, it's an interesting way people, when we've spoken about sports, even in our keynote, there's a different kind of a listening when you're talking about a sports hero doing something or a pop culture person like a Taylor Swift, but certainly like when we've spoken about sports figures. I've seen like a different kind of a listening that emerges.
On my wrap-up, I just want to say something about coaches, and this is both being a coach in my field of work and now having experienced being with coaches in my bodybuilding sport, that there is such a responsibility to the person who you are coaching, or who, as a coach, whether you're on receiving end or are you on the giving end, because you have the power, and this is the positive power. You have the power to make such a transformative difference in somebody's life with what you do. And I'm sure I'm not alone in saying this, because I've seen it in people that I've coached. But I know that I look up to people who coach me and people who teach me, because if it has changed the course of my thinking, the course of how I approach something, that person has made a positive difference in my life. And therefore, my final word to coaches in any field, particularly in sport, is when that person you are coaching has long gone years later and they've grown up or they've moved on, do you want them to look back and think of you with a fear, a pain, a regret, and feel trauma, or do you want them to kind of look back and go, wow, that coach was life-changing for me in the most incredible way? And you know what? My coach last year, even though things happened the way they happened, I will always remember him, because he was life-changing for me, and he got me to love the sport in a way that I never thought I would. So there is a positive outcome to all of it.
I think that's a good note to end on.
Until next
So again, once more, if you've been bullied in a locker room or in a sports team or by a coach, we want to hear from you. We want to share your story anonymously if you want, but please do communicate with us on any of the social media platforms.
And also, if you are a coach or even a player who feels that you have bullied somebody else and are willing to talk about it, we want to hear from you.
Absolutely.